Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the LAI Public Libraries Online Conference 2020. We would much prefer to be meeting you all live, having the chats, renewing old friendships and making new ones. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we are living in a world of change, and so this year we are meeting virtually. But as always, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers and workshops. Our overall theme for the conference is A World in Change, Libraries Survive and Thrive, and it runs from November 2020 to April 2021. We have various subheadings for the different sections. First one is Books, the Simple Bare Necessities. Forget about your worries and strife, and that comes from Blue in the Jungle Book. Second is Uncertain Times, the reading book is here to stay. Thirdly is Well-being, Mindfulness and Resilience. And the fourth is Shared Reading in Digital Land. And as always, our very popular My Life in Books session. This morning, I am delighted to be introducing our first guests for this session, Sasha de Buyl and Patricia Ford. Sasha de Buyl is the director of Cúirt International Festival of Literature in Galway. Prior to Cúirt, she worked for over 10 years as a programmer and literature development professional in Scotland. She managed Scottish Books International, developing projects and partnerships for Scottish writers, festivals and publishers overseas. Sasha has held roles with StAnza International Poetry Festival, Edinburgh International Book Festival, Scottish Book Trust and I Write Book Festival. She was part of the inaugural team working on Book Week Scotland and grew the programme from its inception to a bustling programme featuring hundreds of events and a high-profile touring strand. Sasha then joined the literature team at Creative Scotland, where she worked on national and international literature development. Our moderator today is Patricia Ford, well known in many libraries but a great friend to us here in Galway Public Libraries. She has lived in Galway all her life and, as she says herself, her favourite city in the world. Author of books for children of all ages, her first novel, The Wordsmith, was published to great critical acclaim in 2015, and she has recently published a sequel entitled Mother Tongue. Her many books for younger children include Bumfizzle, the Best on Planet Earth, which was chosen as the Dublin UNESCO Citywide Read in 2019. To the Island, a picture book specially commissioned by Galway 2020 European Capital of Culture for all children who started school in 2020. A former director of Galway International Arts Festival, she is currently chairperson of Children's Books Ireland. And I would like to congratulate to CBI for being well-deserved recipients of the RTE Toy Show. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the conversation between Sasha de Buyl and Patricia Ford.
Good morning and welcome to LAI Public Library Online Conference 2020. I'm here this morning with Sasha de Buyl, who is the director of Cúirt. You're very welcome, Sasha. Good to see you.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it's lovely to be out in the semi-real world talking to somebody.
It's really nice to see another human being. In fact, a host of human beings. It's definitely the most people I've seen in the past 6 weeks.
And certainly people who aren't related to oneself.
Indeed. Yeah.
Is always good. Mm-hmm. So Sasha, tell us all about you. I know you were born in West Cork. Or you're from West Cork?
From West Cork, yeah. Born in Belgium, but my family moved to West Cork when I was 5. So actually I grew up in Ireland and moved away for university when I was 18 years old and spent about 14 years in Scotland, where I kind of got the literature bug. My degree is in English, and then I went on to work for a range of festivals and arts organisations there, including the Edinburgh International Book Festival and Scottish Book Trust. And then, the call of home brought me back again in January of 2020. And that was 700 years ago.
You went to university in St Andrews?
I did, yeah.
And was that an enjoyable experience?
It was, yeah. It's a really small town. I couldn't afford to go on a visiting day, so I showed up on September the 18th, 2005, and was very surprised to learn how small it was. But the course was brilliant, the lecturers were really fantastic, and it's also home to the StAnza International Poetry Festival, which is the first festival I worked at, and it is very dear to my heart.
Fantastic. And then, as you said, the call of home came beckoning. And what took you to Galway?
Well, really, this role. I'd been lucky enough as a student to work and live here over the summers. So I worked for the Galway Film FLA for 2 years and got to know Galway and always knew that it was a brilliant city. And then when I saw the role advertised, I'd been threatening to move home for some years, and my mum was adamant that I should. And with Brexit looming, to be honest, I really wanted to live in a country that was part of Europe. You know, I really feel European as a Belgian-Irish person. Yeah. So it was a really lovely chance to come here. I'm mostly just sad that I haven't had a chance to be in Galway with other people from Galway. Mostly I've just been in my house, which, to be fair, is in Galway.
I know. And in the kind of digital age we live in, taking a job where you're programming a festival of books, which of itself, of people coming together to listen to made-up stories, read to them by the people who made them up. Do you still think festivals are relevant today?
I think so, yeah, very much so. It's definitely, you know, it's something that we were panicked by when the first restrictions were announced. So for a bit of context, our festival programme launched on the 9th of March this year, and the big restrictions in the shutting of arts centres was announced on the 12th of March. So we didn't have very long to kind of celebrate getting the programme over the line this year before everything changed. And yeah, the first question was, you know, does this still matter? Are we still relevant? Especially given that a lot of DIY and kind of, you know, grassroots things just immediately sprang up. People kind of throwing authors together in random Zoom rooms being like, look, you can still see humans. But I feel like there is a place for festivals and for the curation of that. I think it's a place to celebrate new writing. It's a place for readers to come together and really, you know, get to experience and get now a new insight into authors' lives. But it's also a place for really important conversation. You know, a lot of the literature, be that fiction or non-fiction, takes the temperature of where we are at in the world today. And given the absolute madness of 2020, I think we're turning to books and to writers more and more to make sense of that.
Yeah, I'm just remembering the early days of Cúirt, and I'm old enough to remember them. I remember the audience would regularly go and hear somebody wonderful, you know, like Seamus Heaney, and then the audience and the author would go across the street to the coachman to have a drink. We couldn't be in a more different space for the last Cúirt 2020. Tell us how you went about that. I mean, suddenly you're faced with doing the whole thing online.
Yeah.
How does that work? Talk us through how it happened.
It was a very, very strange thing, especially to be just in the door, because of course I just started my job. I was still, you know, establishing a relationship with the staff and the board. And so to turn around and say, I think we should take this online, especially given that Cúirt, you know, the dates are April. So we were 6 weeks after lockdown was announced, in peak lockdown, and we were I think the first festival because we're so early in the calendar to actually just happen, and then suddenly found ourselves in the position if we were going to do this, we were going to be leading the charge. So there was a lot of risk involved, especially given, you know, I mean, I'm fairly comfortable using digital tools, but I'm absolutely not an expert. You know, I'm not the people that are filming us today, for example.
Yeah. And presumably the Arts Centre wasn't set up for any of this? There were no resources there?
I will say, you know, there was some resistance, but people really, you know, Galway Arts Centre and the board took the time to listen to what I was saying, and I assured them about being able to maintain the production quality, being able to maintain the format, and ensure that we've kind of taken all the steps to make sure that the programme would work. For me, our real questions were, okay, what can we do? What can we afford to do? And then what should we do? Because of course, you know, we could have taken everything online. You know, we had a program of 45 or so events that we could have taken online, but we decided to pare it back and really focus on what Cúirt does best, which is celebrating, for this year anyway, given that we had an international audience, celebrating brilliant Irish writing.
Yes.
And bringing that to a world stage.
And Sasha, how many events could you not do once you went online?
So we ended up doing 11. Which is much less. It really is just kind of the highlights, you know, a flavour of what Cúirt could be to people who maybe hadn't experienced it before, and to those who maybe were looking to scratch their Cúirt itch and weren't able to meet in person. Yeah. So we had 9 video events and 2 podcast events to allow us to kind of try out different formats. And
were there any advantages, do you think, to having it online as opposed to having it live?
Yeah, I mean, it's both an advantage and quite daunting in that the sky is the limit. in terms of who you can ask, because suddenly you can get people from around the globe. But I think that makes people, hopefully, that's what I'm doing anyway, think a lot more deeply about why they program and who they program as writers to have conversations. It was nice because it meant that we could include some moderators, for example, that were based in the UK, which we wouldn't normally be able to do. But in the end, we decided to stick with people we'd already invited for 2020. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel, as it were. I think the challenge with that will be looking forward to future years, as suddenly now, the sky is the limit and we're looking to our future festivals. If, the biggest writers in the world, if Hilary Mantel can do an event anywhere, then why should she do an event with you? What are you going to talk about? What conversation are you going to create that is relevant and valid for your festival or your organisation?
And of course there is, for the audience, there is still that distance. You are getting to hear the great conversations that you did have this year in Cúirt, but you're not getting the social side of it at all. And was that very hard for you in your first festival?
It definitely was, yeah, it was very strange. I was so looking forward to having a festival based in Galway and the whole buzz of it. I mean, I would say that Galway is the main character of Cúirt, if you will. Like it's the absolute backbone of the festival, and the community, the audiences, the arts community as a whole just bring that life to it. But what we did find was that people took to Twitter in absolute droves. We built a community throughout the festival of people who were chatting, reflecting on the events, talking about, are you going to this one tomorrow? Yes, I'm absolutely tuning in. People were planning what they were wearing, they were planning what they were going to drink. It was really, really lovely to see. So there was a sense of that, although it is definitely not the same as going for a pint in Noctons afterwards.
And during the event, Sasha, were people able to put comments in the comment box or put questions? The interaction, was there any of that?
For us, because we were so early, out the gate with this, and we were concerned about the administrative time used to moderate live comments, we actually took questions beforehand. And most of the events were pre-records, just to make sure that the technology would stand up to everything, because it was just so new for everyone. But now we've seen many festivals successfully run totally live events, and so we will be incorporating live streaming, hopefully, of in-person events in next year's festival.
And of course you can still sell tickets, so there is some revenue.
Yeah, for 2020, because again, we were first to do it, we didn't actually put a ticket price on it. We thought this is an experiment for us and for everybody else, so we're going to make the content free and see what happens. We did make donations available if people wanted to add a donation to the registration. We asked people to sign up for a ticket because that was very important to kind of understand who came. And the revenue from the donations was actually very high. We made up almost a third of our box office, which is just fantastic. Such a surprise because we budgeted with zero.
It kind of says a lot about the kind of people as well who read books, go to events, and they want it really badly, and they're prepared to.
I feel like we've seen.
I think we've seen that in a sense. People are well prepared to pay money to see a good, strong event.
And what we also found, though, is that by making the content available free, there are so many people who normally would not be able to afford to go, who were able to access our events for the first time, and that was just wonderful and something I would really, really love to continue.
And something maybe to keep in mind when all this is over, that is a way for people to access things. I saw some great events during Cúirt 2020 online, but tell me about what were your kind of goals when you were programming? You mentioned Irish writers. I noticed there were a lot of Irish women writers. Yeah. A lot of good conversations around that. Was that part of your overall plan?
Yeah, I think it just happened to be a bumper year for Irish writing, and so that really kind of came through in what we were putting together. As I said, we only used writers, apart from one exception, who had been in the 2020 programme to begin with. So it was really just bringing them with us because, we felt we'd committed to supporting these writers and supporting their books to begin with, and we just wanted to make sure that we made good on that.
And what for you, Sasha, was the most enjoyable conversation? I know when you ask a festival director that, it's like saying which of your children do you prefer, but what one did you personally enjoy?
Oh, I liked them all.
Were you nervous? Were you anxious?
Definitely, yeah. It was, it was a total unknown for us. We weren't really sure.
But it was an unknown for you on a couple of levels. It was your first festival.
Exactly, yeah. And I still feel like I haven't done a proper Cúirt, because I haven't done it in person.
Oh, I think you did a really good Cúirt. I think you have no worries about that. Yeah. But how did you feel that first day when you sat down to? Who was your first piece that you were on that you had to record?
Who did we have first? We had two podcasts, and so one of the podcasts went out first, I think, which was Roisin Kelly and Michael Gorman, and so those had been kind of recorded in advance, and so it was nice to know that we had them in the bag.
And two great people.
I know, and yeah, absolutely brilliant. The other one that I should mention, actually, because I think a lot of people have seen the videos but maybe haven't listened to the podcasts, is we did an event called Ireland of the Welcomes, which was with Malatu Uche-Okori, who's a fantastic writer, and Udoni Mustafa, specifically talking about the new writing communities in Ireland and how we support them and create space for their work. And that was really nice.
Yeah, and I saw a fabulous event with Elaine Feeney.
Yeah, and Lisa McInerney, that was lovely.
Lovely.
Both writers who didn't have a book out at the time, because though, as you were, Elaine's book was due to be out by the time the festival happened. The pub date got pushed back to August, and so we kind of had just a bit of a broader conversation about, you know, writing in Galway
and great fun.
Yeah, it was just lovely.
It was lovely. It was a real chat. And now that you're heading into, I suppose, your next bout of programming, talk us through it. How do you go about that? Is it you sitting at home reading tons of books, or is it you? How important is it to you to see the writer and see what kind of performer they are? Because these festivals are part the book, but also part the performance.
I think it's definitely a mix of the two, though I have spent the entire summer just reading as much as I can physically fit into my head, and I feel quite full now, in a good way. You know, at the start I was like, okay, I need to refill the well, and I've got a couple of pretty strong ideas about what we're going to do next year, though I don't want to spoil anything.
Sure. And do you work, Sasha, in themes, or do you just find the writers first and then make up the themes around who the best people you have?
I feel like this year has been very much a throw everything that you might have in mind out of the box kind of a year for that. So for now, what I am putting together for 2021 is very much in response to the format that we're going to use and to what I think our audiences will respond to next year. I think, you know, there's this idea of someone who programs as having kind of a singular creative vision, which I have to say I don't really subscribe to. What I'm most interested in is creating events and conversations that reflect what audiences would like to read and hear, with, you know, obviously a bit of my taste thrown in too,
of course,
and also reflecting the most diverse possible range of writers, because I think there is just such a range of talent producing work today, and that it's our responsibility to show people those books are out there.
And do you think, will the programme reflect the times we're living in at all, the whole virus thing? Will there be any nod to that?
There's a small nod. There's no, at least, I mean, I should say invites are going out, you know, at the moment, so it's all very, very formative. There is a small nod to the apocalyptic times we're living in, but there is nothing quite so specific as pandemic related.
Or the dystopian section. I think they might be too.
Yeah.
But, so Sasha, like you were saying, you were the first festival to go online because of where you were. What did you learn, would you say? What were the outcomes from all of that? What did you feel you learned from doing the first digital festival?
Yeah. Well, when taking the programme online, you know, as I mentioned, it was a bit of a risk. It's something that we hadn't done before, and we were very nervous of it. And so we needed to know that it was going to be kind of worth it for us. We would get something out of it. And what we really wanted to do, what I wanted to do, was to have an opportunity to learn about the audiences, because of course, you know, I'm coming into this post new. I don't have an understanding of the existing Cúirt audience, and also there hadn't been a history of kind of rigorous evaluation of the programmes in years past. So the first thing I did was to see if we could set it up so that we would be able to gather data about our audiences and learn a bit more about who they are, where they come from, and what they want and need. And once I knew that was possible, I thought, okay,
and
cool,
how
we can
was
do
it
this.
possible, Sasha? Did you have to fill in a form when you went on to book your ticket?
Yeah, so what we did is, even though the events were freely available, we wanted to make them as easy to access as possible for people, especially given that Cúirt had a bit of an older demographic, and so anything too fiddly, we didn't want to put people off. So what we did is we asked people to register for a ticket, and we used Eventbrite as a platform, though all the events were streamed on our YouTube. So if anyone was having any issues accessing it, we could just point them right there. We could be like, just go there, you'll find what you need. So they registered, and we got a little bit of data through that, so we were able to see kind of where they were, ask them some basic demographic questions. Then the analytics from our YouTube stream were actually quite detailed, which I hadn't realized at the time. So they gave us where everyone was, their age, their gender, a lot of stuff. And then we followed up after the events with a post-event survey. And the survey had some questions which were about the quality of the events and whether people enjoyed them.
And was there any reward for the audience in filling out that post?
They were offered €200 in vouchers for Charlie Burns.
I'm doing it now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And we had an incredible take-up, like more than I've seen in any of my previous projects, including like a nationwide reading festival called Book Week Scotland, which had, you know, several 100,000.
That's because they love Charlie
viewers.
Burns. Actually.
I know, yeah.
That's
Charlie Burns is a really big draw. Yeah. So for a live audience of 3,800 people, we had 742 respondents to our survey, which is almost too much data. Yeah. But loads of wonderful suggestions and comments in there too. And
any surprises, Sasha, in the demographic or the views of the audience? Anything that kind of made you take a step back and say, oh, I wouldn't have thought that?
I think the breadth and range of international viewers was definitely a surprise to us. We had viewers on every single continent. Wow. Which was just like, what? Okay, great, amazing, except for Antarctica, I should say.
The diaspora haven't got there.
Indeed. And then no real surprises in terms of our demographic, you know, although we did skew younger this year, I think, than in previous years.
How are you going to address that now in the future? How are you going to bring in that younger audience? I think this is a problem for every festival in the world in terms of literature. I'm
well aware of that as someone who's worked in literature for over 10 years. I don't think I count as young anymore, but I have for about 10 years been asked, gosh, isn't it nice to see you here? Why are you here and nobody else is?
And you're so young.
Yeah, gosh, and you look so young, although I think I look younger than I am. So our plan is very much to address that, but also to address other areas. So for example, people with disabilities being able to access the events, and people from more diverse ethnic backgrounds as well, because those we compared to census data and we're definitely not reaching kind of the proportion of that population in Ireland today. So that's something we'd like to correct. In terms of younger audiences, I think just ensuring that our writers and our work speaks to both our existing audiences' wants and concerns, but also meets the interests and concerns of younger audiences. And Ireland, I would say, distinct to Scotland and the UK, is a nation of readers. It's fantastic. Everybody reads from the very young up to the older, and they read very broadly. So I think there's a real opportunity there.
It's funny, isn't it? I totally agree with you. I think in Ireland people do read, children read, young people read. I find sometimes, I think the way we spread the message can be tricky.
For sure.
You know, in the old days you put up posters. No matter what you say about that system, and it was bad for the environment and everything else, but people fell upon it. They saw it whether they wanted to or not.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm more worried now with the whole online community. People skim over stuff really quickly. I don't know how you can get that message across. And of course, the very people you're looking for are online. That's where they live. That's their address. All you have to do is get to them. Any ideas about that, Sasha?
Well, that's a really interesting point. And for Cúirt Online, that was something we were really thinking about. The one area that I knew I would need to kind of fill a gap in my knowledge was our marketing and communications, taking it entirely online. And we hired a marketing consultant, Erin O'Dell-Keane, who just did an incredible job in creating that kind of campaign for us to bring audiences in. And we did have 60% of our audience this year was new audience. So that's really a big win for us, and we're hoping that we can bring them with us to 2021. I think there's the kind of cohesive messaging, you know, making sure that it all sits together and flows well, and that you get the information you need to sign up. That is really, really important. But then the other side of it is, like you said, online can be a bit of an echo chamber. So making sure that you're reaching out beyond that original reach that you have. So be that in partnership with other organizations, you know, finding platforms that represent audiences that you're not reaching. I do think that there is something to be said for print marketing, getting out and about. Like, my favorite thing about Cúirt is the pencils.
Yeah, mine too.
I absolutely adore them. And when I came here, when I moved before, you know, when we were still allowed to touch other people and be in the real world, I'd walk around town and people would be like, "Oh, you've just moved to Galway. What are you doing?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I work for Cúirt, the literature festival." And they'd be like, "Don't know that." And I'd be like, "Oh, do you know the pencils?" And they were like, "Oh, the pencils. You're the pencil lady." So yeah, I think there is.
So tell our audience, actually, who might not know the pencils, tell them what that is.
So every year, Cúirt Festival has these absolutely massive pencils that go and are installed outside of Knockdowns in town, and it's the way of kind of heralding the festival. People know that it's there, and they're up for every day of the festival. And I believe they were designed by Bart Brannock, and long may they continue. I think they're great.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in bringing the arts onto the street. You know, and I think letting people come upon things, discover things is very important.
And that's something we're going to try our hand at next year for sure, especially given that we're not allowed to encourage people to congregate, so we're going to have to encourage people to discover the city and literature at their own pace. So we're looking at different ways that we can do that.
And Sasha, knowing as we do that the cavalry is on the way and the vaccine must be coming nearer, There will come a day when you won't be having to do the whole festival online.
I know.
How much of the online experience do you think you'll keep? How much will you take with you in a normal year when we don't have to worry about public health and safety?
But
what would you imagine doing?
Yeah, this has been a big learning for us from 2020, is that suddenly there were people who would never be able to come to the festival who were able to access it. And they are not people who are in Antarctica. They are people who are in like a Carlow or a Kinvara, but who couldn't afford the trip into town, or perhaps have caring responsibilities, or who have, physical access requirements, or perhaps actually, a disability or a mental health issue that is less of a physical barrier, but say someone with, say, anxiety or on the autism spectrum who might not feel comfortable in that space. Yeah. All of these people were able to suddenly come and access the festival on their own terms in a space that made them comfortable. And I am keen not to lose that element as we go forward. I think it will still remain really important for us.
So maybe that will become something in all festivals. That is an element.
Yeah, or at least that it causes them to stop and think and really think. Because I think, for example, after the festival, we were hailed as being, a champion of accessibility and completely changing the game. And I felt very guilty about that. I don't think that's true, because we were not. None of our events were captioned, for example. We were doing the very bare minimum what we could afford this year. And what I'm hoping is that for all organisations, it will make them go, oh, actually, it isn't that hard to make these things more accessible. What can we do, and how can we build that into just the design and build of our events to begin with? Yeah. Instead of as an afterthought.
And technology can become our servant.
Exactly.
Instead of the way it is at the moment, our master.
Indeed.
So before I let you go, I do want to ask you about your own reading. What kind of, I won't put you on the spot and ask you who's your favourite author or what's your favourite book, but what kind of things do you like to read when you're at home?
Absolutely. I read so widely. I would say that it's very, very hard to categorise my taste. I love a bit of everything. To give you a flavour, the best book that I've read in the last month or so is a book by Brian Washington, who's an American author, and he has his first novel coming out called Memorial, and it's out in January, and it is incredible. It's one of the best things I've read all year. But I also really loved Doireann Ní Ghríofa's book, A Ghost in the Throat, this year. That's a beautiful piece of writing. And right now I'm reading a non-fiction essay collection called Disability Visibility by Alice Wong, who's a disability writer based in the States. And that is just such an incredible, it's really incisive writing, but it's also just such an incredible insight into, as I said, just, a demographic that often are overlooked and have a lot of really interesting things to say.
And Sasha, do you read one book at a time, 20 books at a time? What do you think?
I try really hard to read one book at a time. Yeah, if I get really stressed out by not finishing books. I am so in awe of people who can read the first 50 pages of something and go, do you know what, it's not for me. Life's too short to read bad books or to read books that don't grab you. I feel this huge sense of guilt and pressure that I have to finish it, because if I don't, well, the book has beaten me, or I am not.
And they've made such an effort.
I know they made such an effort, so I really do try and see them through to the end. But it means that it can be quite slow going sometimes, because I'll sit with a book. Like I read Marlon James's Black Leopard Red Wolf this year, and I really enjoyed it, but oh my God, I found it such a slog. And I was like, I'm going to get through it. It took me like 3 weeks.
Sasha, you're a good person.
Thank you.
So growing up in West Cork, Sasha, there you are now, you're a child. What kind of a report were you getting in school, age 10?
I was a pretty good student. I will just say that. Yeah. I don't know. It was, yeah.
Were you a reader at 10?
I was an absolute reader, yeah. That is the one thing I would get in trouble in school for, was that I would I would finish my work too quickly and then hide a book behind my book in order to read. And I was regularly, admonished for that.
And did you get a lot of encouragement at home to read? Can you remember when that started?
Definitely, yeah. We've always had a house full of books. My mum is a writer, so the house is absolutely filled with books. But I definitely, I think I was quite bullheaded when it came to books when I was younger. So if there was something I wanted to read, I was going to read it, and I was going to ignore absolutely everyone else in order to do so. I have a big family. I have 3 sisters, and so reading was definitely an escape, in that I could read it literally anywhere. So, I could have 3 people having a blazing row next to me, and I'd be sat there happy out.
And can you remember the first books you read? What were the things that first grabbed your imagination?
I think for me, a lot of people, especially in a literature background, have, you know, they're like, oh, well, I read the classics and I was reading Dickens 7 and blah. I am not that person. I loved children's books. I was a total kids book nut. One of my favourite children's writers, who I discovered in our tiny, tiny back of the classroom library as a child, was Margaret Mahie.
Oh, yeah.
Who's a short story and children's writer from New Zealand. And her work is just so incredible. And I think if anyone has a chance to go to their local library, there's one here. I checked earlier. I always check. Her work is still available. She won the Carnegie Medal for a book called The Changeover, but she writes these short stories for like around, like, I don't know, 8 to 12. Yeah. And they are so short, but they're so well drawn, they're so imaginative, and they're absolutely beautiful. So.
And were you a fantasy person? Were you Narnia and The Hobbit?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, all of them. Anything going, even, you know, like the classics and the really, really good ones, but like literally anything
the Hardy
that had a
Boys.
fantasy setting, I was like, yeah, I'll take that. I remember when I was about 15 reading a series of I don't know, 27 books, this like Wicca series, which was all about a teenage witch, and I, of course, just ate it up.
And with children as well, series are so important, aren't they?
Definitely, yeah, because you keep that reading going, and because they're so Moorish, you just have to have the next one.
And were you the kind of child that the book was also an object to you? Did you like nice clean books with everything perfect?
I'm definitely not like as like my mother, who completely destroys books. Sorry, Mum, it's true. But I think I had to be. I'm not super precious about them. I give them away, I dog-ear them, I write in them. But I had to make peace with that early on, because I had a little sister who would tear the crap out of my books, and she actually tore up a first edition paperback of the first Harry Potter, because I was a very early Harry Potter adopter. It was ruined. It's still readable, of course, but you know, like in terms of the resale value, that is gone. Not that that matters.
And did you ever think about writing? Did you ever think about writing something yourself?
I've thought about it over the years. However, I think when you work in literature, you're so aware of the work that goes into creating a book. I worked for 2 years at the Arts Council in Scotland, Creative Scotland, and every day I spoke to writers about their development, their opportunities, how they could build a career out of this, and it was just so clear that this is a job, and people put the time in. I'm sure it's the same with you. You sit down and there's a slog, and you have to put the work in to make the work good. It's not, you don't start writing and have it be brilliant to begin with. And I frankly have not put the time in, so I'm totally fine with not being a writer at this point.
And I think it's really hard when you have a full-time job like you do, a very demanding job, to find the time in your head to be creative in that way. I mean, you use your creativity in your programming. And
for sure, I hope so.
And now, if I could give you anybody you wanted for next year's Cúirt, just alive or dead, you can have them, who would you choose?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I'm trying to think about all the people that I want to be able to invite in person that I'm not going to get to, so they will probably be international names. There's a writer in the States called Alexander Chee, who writes novels and nonfiction essays. In fact, he writes autobiographical fiction too, so there's kind of this merge between them, and he is just one of the most brilliant writers that I've ever read, so I would probably invite him over, because I hope to one day in the future.
And where do you stand on poetry?
Big fan, big fan of poetry. Actually, there's a couple of poets that I would love to bring over in the future years.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Like we were saying about Irish people are great readers. I feel we're not great poetry readers, particularly.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think people, probably from school.
Because there's a lot of poets.
Yeah, well, a lot of poets. But I do feel people feel a lot of the time that poetry is more intimidating than picking up a book. And I think it does come from school, unfortunately, that in school we're taught to evaluate poetry and analyse it rather than enjoy it. Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of really, really brilliant poetry that's coming out at the moment that is I think more easy to come to, because it packs an emotional punch, because they're discussing difficult issues. I feel like some of the most important writings on race at the moment are coming through poetry. Thinking about poets like Roger Robinson or Natalie Diaz. There's a fantastic poet from New Zealand called Tusiata Avia, who I just like, if it were possible to fly her over here, I would do it tomorrow. So I think that is perhaps a way for people who aren't so keen into poetry to have a try.
Yeah, Sarah Crossan, who was the laureate in Ogue, the previous laureate in Ogue, I loved what she did. She had a project called We Are the Poets, and she was saying, you know, poetry is for all of us.
Definitely.
And I think I remember one of the first times in London seeing the poems on the tube. Yeah. And thinking that was such a wonderful project. I'd love to see more of that kind of thing, more accessibility, kind of public accessibility to poetry. And we've had a great tradition in recent times too of kind of declamatory poems, very political poems. People like Elaine Feeney that has just written a wonderful novel. So do you think they're all ways in for people? Does that make it all more accessible for people who might be afraid of poetry?
I hope so, yeah. And I feel like most people, even if they would think of themselves not as a poetry reader, if you were to press them, they probably have a poem that they do revisit. It's just that, you know, the weight of a full collection or that kind of more academic, like, examine this poem, that can be a bit daunting. I think there are writers that are really pushing that, though. I'm thinking of Holly Mcnish, the UK-based poet, because she writes, her poems are just so frank and honest and clear and really like empathic, but she also dots them in throughout prose. She has this wonderful book called Nobody Told Me that's about having a kid, and it's just the most refreshing and lovely way in, and it has a lot of poetry in it, but it also just has her own reflections on what it feels like to kind of give birth to another human being. And that is, it's one of the most accessible things I've ever read, while still being beautiful work.
And in a totally contradictory way, I suppose, there are people in Ireland who have really caught the public imagination. I'm thinking of when Seamus Heaney died. I wonder how many poets have had Croke Park stand up for a minute's silence before a match for a poet.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You know, that was so beautiful because he had just totally come into the culture and the public awareness.
And, I think it's not to take that for granted. Like, that does not happen in other countries.
Yeah. So we definitely have something that we could build on there.
For sure, yeah. And I hope to be part of that.
Yeah. Well, Sasha, it's been an absolute joy talking to you, and I look forward to many more wonderful Cúirt festivals. And as Sasha said, some of it will be in person, but it seems that always some of it will be online also. So thank you to you two for listening this morning, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.